What's up, Quellwood kids? Hey, it's Mr. Olinger here. That's right, Mrs. Olinger's husband. I am guest speaker for today. We're going to be reading a little Holes, one of my favorite books. So I hope everything's going pretty well with you guys and you're enjoying your time off. The weather's been awesome. So get outside and hang out in your backyard or do what you got to do. But today we're going to be talking a little bit about Holes. We're going to be reading chapter 4. Kind of a cool fact about it is, if you probably already know this, but Stanley Yelnats is a palindrome, and that means that you can read his name forward and backwards and it reads the same. There's some really cool ones out there. So here's one for you. Do geese see God? That is 4 words and 13 letters. So why don't you try to see if you can Google or find some other palindromes out there that are longer or cooler. There are tons of them that are super fun. So look that one up, write that one down, see if you can make sure that it is in fact a palindrome. My favorite palindrome is taco cat. Love tacos, and it's just a funny word. So there you go. Really quick trivia question for you, so you may know Holes, or as you're reading it, you're going to pay attention. So my question is, what happens to Barf Bag? So as soon as you find that answer out, if you think you already know, you could maybe leave a comment, and that would be awesome. So we're going to go ahead and start off with chapter 5 of reading of Holes. There were 6 large gray tents. Each one had a back letter on it, A, B, C, D, E, or F. Stanley was assigned to D tent. Mr. Pendanski was his counselor. My name is easy to remember. It's Mr. Pendanski, he said. He shook hands with Stanley outside of the tent. 3 easy words: pen, dance, key. Mr. Sir returned to the office. Mr. Pendanski was younger than Mr. Sir, and not nearly as scary looking. The top of his head was shaved so close it was almost bald, but his face was covered with a thick, curly black beard. His nose was badly sunburned. Mr. Sir isn't really so bad, said Mr. Pendanski. He's just been in a bad mood ever since he quit smoking. The person you've got to worry about is the warden. There's only one rule at Camp Green Lake. Don't upset the warden. Stanley nodded, as if he understood. I want you to know, Stanley, that I respect you, Mr. Pendanski said. I understand you've made some bad mistakes in your life. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But everyone makes mistakes. You may have done some bad things, but that doesn't make you a bad kid. Stanley nodded. It seemed pointless to try to tell him, his counselor, that he was innocent. He figured that everyone possibly said that. He didn't want Mr. Pendanski to think he had a bad attitude. I'm going to help you turn your life around, he said to his counselor, but you're going to have to help too. Can I count on your help? Yes, sir, Stanley said. Mr. Pendanski said, good, and patted Stanley on the back. 2 boys, each carrying a shovel, were coming across the compound. Mr. Pendanski called to them, Rex, Alan, I want you to come over and say hello to Stanley. He's the newest member of our team. The boys glanced wearily at Stanley. They were dripping with sweat, and their faces were so dirty that it took Stanley a moment to notice that one kid was white and the other kid was black. What happened to Barf Bag? Asked the black kid. Lewis is still in the hospital, said Mr. Pendanski. He won't be returning. He told the boys to come shake hands with Stanley and introduce themselves like gentlemen. Hi, the white kid grunted. That's Alan, said Mr. Pendanski. My name's not Alan, the boy said. It's Squid, and that's X-Ray. Hey, said X-Ray. He smiled and shook Stanley's hand, who wore glasses, but they were so dirty, Stanley wondered how he could see out of them at all. Mr. Pendanski told Alan to go to the rec hall and bring out the other boys to meet Stanley. Then he led him inside the tent. There were 7 cots, each one less than 2 feet from the next one. Which was Lewis's cot, said Mr. Pendanski. Barf Bag slept here, said X-Ray, kicking at one of the beds. All right, Stanley, that'll be yours. Mr. Pendanski, Stanley looked at the cot and nodded. He wasn't particularly thrilled about sleeping in the same cot that had been used by somebody named Barfbag. 7 cots were stacked across 2 piles on one side of the tent. The open end of crates were facing outward. Stanley put his backpack, change of clothes, and a towel at what used to be Barfbag's crate. It was at the bottom of the stack that had 3 in it. Squid returned with 4 other boys. The first 3 were introduced by Mr. Pendanski as Jose, Theodore, and Ricky. They called themselves Magnet, Armpit, and Zigzag. They all have nicknames, exclaimed Mr. Pendanski. However, I prefer to use their names their parents gave them, the names that society will recognize them when they have returned to become useful members and hard-working members of society. It ain't just a nickname, X-Ray told Mr. Pendanski. He tapped the rim of his glasses. I can see inside you, Mom. You've got a big, fat heart. The last boy either didn't have a real name or else he didn't have a nickname at all. Mr. Pendanski and X-Ray called him Zero. You know why his name's Zero? Asked Mr. Pendanski. Because there's nothing inside his head. He smiled and playfully took Zero's shoulder. Zero said nothing. And that's Mom, the boy said. Mr. Pendanski smiled at him. If it makes you feel better to call me Mom, Theodore, go ahead and call me Mom. He turned to Stanley. If you have questions, Theodore will help you. You got that, Theodore? I'm depending on you. Theodore spit a thin line of saliva between his teeth, causing some of the other boys to complain about the need to keep their home sanitary. You were all here new once, said Mr. Pendanski, and you all know what it feels like. I'm counting on every one of you to help Stanley. Stanley looked at the ground. Mr. Pendanski left the tent, and soon the other boys began to file out as well, taking their towels and change of clothes with them. Stanley was relieved to be left alone, but he was so thirsty. He felt as if he would die if he didn't get something to drink soon. Hey, Theodore, he said, going after him, do you know where I can find my water canteen? Theodore whirled and grabbed Stanley by his collar. My name's not Theodore, he said. It's Armpit. He threw Stanley to the ground. Stanley stared up at him, terrified. There's a water spigot on the wall of the shower stall. Thanks, Armpit, said Stanley. As he watched the boy turn and walk away, he couldn't for the life of him figure out why anyone would want to be named Armpit. In a way, it made him feel a little better about having to sleep in a cot that had been used by somebody named Barfbag. Maybe it was a term of respect. All right, we'll see you tomorrow for Chapter 6.